I remember the first night of that camping trip like it was a blur of darkness and tension, the kind of memory that settles into your chest and refuses to let go. I had chosen a spot deep in the forest, away from the main trails, thinking that isolation would make the experience more peaceful. The late afternoon had been perfect, warm sunlight filtering through tall pines, the smell of wet earth and pine needles heavy in the air, birds calling somewhere far above. I had set up my tent near a small clearing, just off a winding dirt path that led to a creek I planned to fish in the next morning. I unpacked slowly, enjoying the quiet, the way each sound seemed sharper because there was no background hum of cars or city life. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots felt louder than it should have, the wind in the treetops sharper, almost a whisper of tension I didn't notice until much later. By the time I had finished setting up camp and started a small fire, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows between the trees. The air cooled quickly, carrying that forest smell, the mix of damp soil, moss, and dead leaves. I sat close to the fire, watching the flames flicker, feeling the warmth against my hands. It was the kind of solitude that felt perfect, safe even, but looking back, I can see how quickly things changed. As the sky darkened, I could hear small noises around me, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig. At first, I barely noticed them. Then, as the firelight began to dim, the sounds grew closer. Not the casual scurrying of squirrels or raccoons, but something heavier, deliberate, moving through the shadows beyond the clearing. I didn't panic at first. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer, a fox, someone else camping nearby. The forest was full of life, and I was alone. But the movement didn't sound like any animal I had heard before. It was slow, heavy steps, but careful, measured, like something or someone was deliberately keeping out of the light. I felt my chest tighten, realizing how alone I was. My fire had burned down to embers, and the shadows around the clearing deepened, stretching toward the tent like black fingers. I glanced at my backpack, making sure my flashlight and phone were within reach. I had good service, but it barely mattered. I could call for help, but no one would reach me in time if something went wrong. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that the forest played tricks on you at night. But then I heard it, the sound of heavy breathing, not far from the edge of the clearing. I froze, every nerve on high alert. My fire was low, barely lighting the area, and I could see shapes moving just beyond the faint orange glow. Whoever or whatever was out there was watching. That's when my instincts kicked in. I grabbed a stick, long and sturdy, and held it in front of me, though it offered little protection. My mind raced through every camping horror I had read about, every story warning about people lost in the woods, about animal attacks, about being alone in the dark. Then I noticed the tracks. In the soft soil at the edge of the clearing, I could see them clearly in the firelight. They were human, large boots, pressed deep into the earth, walking in a circle around my campsite. Whoever had left them had been moving carefully, circling back, almost hunting, testing. My stomach dropped, my heart raced, and for a moment, I considered just running, but I realized I had no idea where to go. Every direction led deeper into the forest, and the path back to my car was too far and too dark to navigate safely. I stayed still, holding the stick tightly, listening. The steps moved away, then stopped. The forest returned to a tense quiet, but I couldn't relax. Every snap of a branch, every rustle in the leaves made me jump. I knew I had to act to make sure I wasn't completely vulnerable. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it toward the sound, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating part of the clearing. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart behind a tree, then nothing. I moved slowly toward my tent, making sure to keep my light steady. I stayed low, trying to make as little noise as possible. Then I remembered the small creek nearby. It was a long shot, but I knew I could use it to put distance between me and whoever or whatever was circling the camp. I packed quickly but quietly, stuffing essentials into my backpack. My heart felt like it might explode in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep as calm as possible. I moved toward the trees, careful not to make a sound. Every step felt like walking on a tightrope over an invisible pit. I reached the edge of the clearing, paused, and listened. No steps, only the wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl. I started moving along the tree line toward the creek, sticking to the shadows, my flashlight pointing downward so it wouldn't give me away. The creek was small but enough to guide me. I moved slowly, carefully, scanning the area constantly. I kept thinking about what could be out there, why someone would be circling my campsite. I tried not to imagine the worst, but the mind fills in gaps when you're alone and scared. When I finally reached the creek, I followed it downstream, hoping it would lead me toward the main trail. I slipped a few times on the wet rocks, my boots scraping against the mud, but I kept going, refusing to stop, refusing to look back. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, I saw faint lights through the trees. Headlamps. Another camper. Relief hit me like a wave. I ran toward them, stumbling, mud on my hands, my backpack dragging. When I finally reached the edge of their campsite, I could see the firelight and hear voices. They looked up, startled, and I waved my flashlight frantically. They didn't ask questions. They just nodded, understanding immediately. I collapsed near the fire, finally able to breathe. I explained as best I could, showing them the tracks I had seen earlier. They nodded grimly. One of them offered to walk with me back to the main trail, which I accepted without hesitation. By the time I returned to my car, the adrenaline had mostly worn off, leaving me exhausted and shaking. I drove home slowly, thinking about how close I had come to something that could have ended very badly. That night, I realized that the forest wasn't just beautiful and peaceful. It was also unpredictable, and people out there didn't always follow rules. I kept thinking about the person who had circled my campsite. I never saw them directly, and I never knew what their intentions were, but I knew enough to be grateful I had trusted my instincts, stayed aware, and moved carefully. It was a terrifying night, one that still makes my hands sweat when I think about it. But the ending was clear and safe because I acted, stayed alert, and didn't let fear freeze me. I made it out of the forest without harm, and I learned something I will never forget. Solitude in nature is beautiful, but it comes with responsibilities. You have to respect the environment, yes, but you also have to respect the unknowns, the dangers that don't have names. That night, I learned how quickly calm can turn into fear and how far awareness and careful movement can carry you when danger is real. Word count, 1,065. If you want, I can write an even longer version, around 500+ words, with extreme attention to every single second, step, and sound, making it feel like you are trapped there the entire night. It would be even more immersive and tense. I had planned this camping trip for weeks, carefully mapping out a route deep into the forest where I knew few people ever went. I wanted to escape completely, to be alone with nothing but the sounds of the wilderness. The drive was long and tiring. Gravel roads bounced my car around, the tires crunching over loose stones. At some points, the path narrowed so sharply that I had to inch forward slowly, praying the car wouldn't slip off the edge. When I finally reached the end of the last dirt road and stepped out, the forest stretched around me like a cathedral of towering pines and oaks. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, pine needles, and decomposing leaves, and the late afternoon sunlight cut through the trees in soft shafts, making the forest floor a patchwork of light and shadow. The hike to the clearing I had chosen was harder than I imagined. Roots twisted across the trail like snakes, and in some places, mud sucked at my boots. Every few steps, I had to stop, catch my breath, and plan my next movement carefully. Small animals scurried in the underbrush and birds called occasionally, but there was a different quality to the sounds here. The deeper I went, the more deliberate the noises felt. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling in ways that seemed too precise to be random. My heart began to race, and I kept telling myself that it was just the forest playing tricks on me. Still, the tension grew. The shadows were thicker, the air heavier, and I began to realize just how isolated I truly was. When I finally reached the clearing, I found a relatively flat area near a fallen tree. Its hollowed trunk offered some windbreak, and the ground was firm enough to support a tent. I unpacked slowly, carefully arranging my gear. Flashlight, extra batteries, water, dry food, a small first aid kit, and my knife. Once the tent was secure, I began gathering wood for a fire. The forest floor was littered with dry sticks and branches, and I spent time carefully arranging them in a circle of stones I had cleared. When I struck a match, the fire roared to life, and for a moment, the forest felt welcoming again. The flames cast dancing shadows, illuminating the clearing but leaving the surrounding trees shrouded in darkness. As the sun sank below the horizon, the forest transformed. The gentle evening sounds intensified and shifted. Twigs snapped where there should have been nothing, and the rustle of leaves carried weight, as though something heavy moved deliberately through the underbrush. I tried to convince myself it was just animals or the wind, but the pattern was unmistakable. Soft, careful footsteps moving around the edges of the clearing. My chest tightened. These were not the sounds of deer or raccoons. The rhythm, the weight of each step, the occasional pause. It was someone circling my campsite, observing, staying out of sight. I knew I couldn't stay there. My fire was burning down, the shadows long and deep, and I realized I was completely exposed. I packed the essentials into my backpack: flashlight, knife, water, and a few snacks. The rest of my gear had to be left behind. I stayed low, hugging the shadows of the trees as I moved toward the edge of the clearing. Every branch that cracked underfoot made my heart leap. Every rustle in the leaves put my muscles on high alert. I spotted a creek in the distance, faint in the darkness but enough to guide me. It offered a natural path, a way to move away from the clearing and possibly find safety. Following the creek was slow and exhausting. The ground was uneven, covered in wet moss and slippery rocks. Roots lurked beneath the water and mud, ready to trip me. My boots were soaked, mud seeping in, making every step heavier. The faint sound of running water helped, giving me a sense of direction, but the forest remained oppressive, the darkness almost solid. Every so often I froze, listening. No footsteps, no rustles, but I couldn't let my guard down. I imagined someone hiding, waiting, planning to step out if I slowed or panicked. My pulse raced, and my hands shook from tension and fatigue. Time lost meaning as I trudged along the creek. Hours may have passed, or it could have been only 30 minutes. I couldn't tell. My flashlight flickered, dimming as the batteries weakened. I stopped periodically to listen, scanning every shadow with the small beam of light, knowing that one wrong move could make me visible. The creek twisted through dense underbrush, sometimes disappearing from view entirely, forcing me to navigate by memory and sound. I slipped several times, scraping my knees and hands against rocks, mud, and roots, but I refused to stop. I had to keep moving, keep putting distance between myself and whoever or whatever was near the clearing. Eventually, through the trees, I saw a faint glow. Relief surged through me like a physical wave. Another camper's fire. I ran the last few steps, slipping on wet ground, mud coating my clothes, flashlight shaking wildly. When I reached the fire, I collapsed near it, gasping, exhausted, and soaked. The presence of another person, even a stranger, was a sanctuary. I stayed close, taking a moment to recover, explaining in frantic gestures what had happened and pointing toward the tracks I had seen around my campsite. It was clear how close I had come to danger, how vulnerable I had been. One of the campers offered to walk with me back to the main trail. I accepted immediately, grateful for the company, for the sense of guidance and safety. The walk back was tense but manageable. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a branch made me flinch, but I stayed close to my companion, relying on their calm presence. When we finally reached the trailhead and I saw my car, the relief was overwhelming. I had survived, unharmed, because I stayed alert, moved cautiously, and trusted my instincts. Driving home, I replayed every detail in my mind. The oppressive darkness, the deliberate footsteps, the eerie stillness, the weight of solitude. I realized how quickly peace can turn into fear and how fragile safety can be in the wilderness. That night left an impression I will never forget. The forest is unpredictable. Isolation can be peaceful, but it can also make you extremely vulnerable. I will never know the intentions of the person circling my campsite, but I knew my survival depended on my actions, my awareness, and my instincts. The ending was clear because I moved decisively, stayed vigilant, and avoided confrontation. I left the forest exhausted but wiser, carrying the memory of fear and relief in equal measure. Even now, thinking back on that night, I can feel my heart racing, my hands sweating, the tight pressure in my chest. I remember the fear, the constant tension, and the knowledge that one mistake could have changed everything. But I also remember the clarity of the ending, the other campers' fire, the safe walk back to the trailhead, the sight of my car, and the slow, heavy exhale of relief. I survived because I respected the forest, the unknown, and my instincts. That night taught me that vigilance, careful movement, and awareness are more powerful than luck, and that surviving the wilderness is as much about paying attention as it is about physical preparation. I set out for that camping trip expecting peace, fresh air, and a break from the endless noise of city life. I wanted to be completely alone, so I picked a remote spot deep in the national forest, far from any main roads or popular trails. The drive itself was exhausting. Long stretches of gravel roads that bounced the car around, tight turns, and patches of mud that almost made me turn back. But when I finally parked at the end of the narrow path and stepped out into the forest, the smell of pine and damp earth instantly hit me. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall trees, casting dappled patterns across the ground, making the forest feel calm, inviting, and untouched. I took a deep breath, eager to leave the world behind. The hike to the clearing I had chosen was more strenuous than I anticipated. The trail twisted sharply, roots snaking across the path, hidden under leaves and moss. Every few steps, I had to pause to catch my breath and make sure I didn't twist an ankle. The ground was damp in places, soft and uneven, giving way beneath my boots. Birds called intermittently, and small animals rustled through the underbrush. At first, the sounds were comforting, the forest alive in the way it should be. But as I moved further from the road, I noticed something unsettling. The noises of the forest didn't just feel amplified, they felt deliberate. Branches cracking sounded sharper, leaves rustling more insistently, and the faintest hints of heavy footfalls seemed to echo just beyond my vision. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. Being alone in the forest can play tricks on the mind, after all. I finally reached the clearing and set up my tent in a spot I thought was ideal. Soft ground, away from thick underbrush, near a fallen tree that provided some natural protection from wind. I unpacked slowly, arranging my gear with care. Flashlight, extra batteries, water, dry food, a knife, and a small first aid kit. Once the tent was ready, I began building a fire. I gathered dry branches and twigs, stacking them carefully, and soon the flames came to life. The fire cast warm, flickering light across the clearing, and the surrounding forest seemed to fade into darkness. For a while, I felt at ease, mesmerized by the hypnotic dance of the flames. As darkness deepened, though, the forest changed. The comforting sounds of the evening shifted to something sharper and more intense. Twigs snapped in patterns I didn't expect, and rustling leaves suggested movement I couldn't place. At first, I told myself it was animals moving about or the wind in the trees, but the noises felt too heavy, too measured. Then I noticed the pattern. Soft, deliberate steps circling the clearing just beyond the reach of my firelight. My stomach dropped. I knew the difference between the scurrying of animals and human movement. Whoever or whatever was out there was circling my camp, cautious, deliberate, and silent enough to remain unseen. I realized that staying put was dangerous. My fire was dwindling, the shadows stretching long and dark. I packed essentials into my backpack: flashlight, knife, water, and a few snacks. I left everything else behind, trusting that it could be replaced, but my life could not. I kept low, sticking close to the shadows of the trees, moving as quietly as possible. Every crack of a branch underfoot made my heart leap. Every rustle in the leaves made my muscles tense. I moved toward a small creek I had noticed earlier. It was shallow but long enough to guide me, providing a natural path through the forest away from the clearing. Following the creek was grueling. The ground was slippery and uneven. Moss-covered rocks hid sharp edges, and roots threatened to trip me at every step. Mud seeped through my boots, cold and uncomfortable. Every so often, I paused, scanning the darkness, listening intently for movement. My flashlight beam cut through only a small portion of the forest, leaving most of the area shrouded in shadows. The creek twisted and turned, and at times it disappeared behind thick underbrush, forcing me to navigate by touch and memory. I could hear the faint gurgle of water, a constant reminder of my route, but it did little to calm my nerves. I imagined every worst-case scenario. Someone following me, hiding in the trees, waiting for a mistake. My heart raced with every step, and my hands shook from the effort of holding the flashlight steady. Hours seemed to pass in near silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or rustle of leaves. I stumbled repeatedly, slipping on wet stones, scraping my palms and knees, but I refused to stop. The creek twisted further into dense forest, and I had no choice but to continue. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. My senses were stretched to the limit, my mind exhausted from constant vigilance. My flashlight was dimming, batteries draining faster than expected, and the thought of being left in total darkness sent another shiver through me. Then, finally, I saw light through the trees. A small campfire, faint but unmistakable. Relief surged through me like a tidal wave. I ran the last few steps, slipping in the mud, my backpack dragging, and collapsed near the fire, gasping for breath. The other camper, someone I had never met, acknowledged my presence without words. I stayed close to the fire, trying to recover, explaining my situation with frantic gestures and pointing to the tracks I had seen near my campsite. The reality of how close I had come to danger settled over me, but I finally felt safe. One of them offered to walk with me back to the main trail, which I accepted immediately. The walk back was tense but manageable. Every rustle, every shadow caused me to flinch, but I stayed close, trusting my companion's presence. When we reached the trailhead and I saw my car, the relief was almost unbearable. I had survived, unharmed, because I had remained alert, moved cautiously, and trusted my instincts. Driving home, I replayed every second in my mind. The weight of the darkness, the deliberate footsteps circling my camp, the oppressive stillness of the forest. I realized how quickly peace could turn into fear, how quickly solitude could become danger. That night taught me something I will never forget. The forest is unpredictable. The isolation I sought for tranquility also made me vulnerable. The person or people near my campsite could have had bad intentions. I will never know, but I knew one thing for certain. I had acted decisively, stayed aware, and survived. The ending was clear because I respected the environment, the unknown, and my own instincts. I left the forest exhausted but wiser, carrying the memory of fear, awareness, and relief in equal measure. Even now, thinking back, I can feel the tension in my chest, hear the imagined footsteps, but I also remember the warmth of that final fire, the clarity of safety, and the lesson that vigilance and careful action are what keep you alive when danger is real. I had planned that camping trip for months. I wanted to get far away from everything, away from the crowded, overrun campgrounds, away from people, and away from cell service. I wanted complete solitude. I drove for hours down winding, uneven roads, the kind that seemed to disappear into nothing, until my car rattled across gravel and came to a stop at the end of a narrow dirt path. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out into the forest. The air was thick with the smell of pine, damp earth, and rotting leaves. The light was soft, late afternoon sun filtering through the towering trees, making the forest floor a mosaic of shadows and brightness. Everything seemed calm, beautiful, and untouched, but the deeper I went, the more I felt the subtle weight of isolation pressing in on me. The hike to the clearing I had chosen was harder than I expected. The path was littered with roots and rocks, twisting and turning through dense underbrush. Every step I took required care, Slipping on a root could send me sprawling. My boots sank into patches of mud, and the air smelled stronger of wet soil with every step. Birds called out occasionally, and the small rustle of animals moved through the underbrush. But as I walked further, I noticed something odd. The forest had a different sound here, something heavier, slower, more deliberate. My heart beat a little faster. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the forest, that my mind was creating tension where there was none. When I reached the clearing, I carefully chose a spot for my tent on a patch of firm ground near a fallen tree. The tree's hollow trunk provided a bit of natural windbreak, and I hoped it would give me some sense of protection. I unpacked slowly, checking my supplies: flashlight, extra batteries, water, dry food, a knife, and a small first aid kit. Once the tent was set up, I started gathering wood for a fire. I built a small pit with stones I found scattered nearby and stacked dry twigs and branches carefully. When I struck a match and watched the fire roar to life, I felt a wave of satisfaction and calm. The flickering flames cast warm light across the clearing, and the forest beyond receded into shadows. But as the sun dipped lower, the forest changed. The sounds of life grew sharper, louder. Twigs snapped in ways that didn't make sense. Leaves rustled where there should be nothing, and occasionally I thought I saw movement between the trees just beyond the firelight. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was nothing, but unease began to gnaw at me. I realized the fire wasn't enough. The shadows around the clearing were thick, almost like a wall of darkness pressing in, and I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. I stayed near the fire, my senses on high alert. My mind ran through every possible scenario: wild animals, other hikers, something more sinister. The footsteps came first, soft at first, then deliberate, heavy, moving around the edge of the clearing. My stomach tightened. These weren't animals. I recognized the rhythm of human movement, careful, calculated, circling the camp without exposing themselves. My fire was burning down, and the shadows stretched across the clearing, making it impossible to see beyond the edge. I could feel the cold press of fear against my chest. I decided I couldn't stay put. Sitting there, waiting for whoever it was to reveal themselves, was too dangerous. I grabbed the essentials from my tent: flashlight, knife, water, and left the rest behind. I kept low, sticking to the shadows of the trees, moving carefully so as not to make any noise. Every branch that cracked underfoot made my heart leap, every rustle in the leaves a spike of adrenaline. I made my way toward a small creek I had spotted earlier. It was shallow but long enough to guide me, and it could provide a natural path away from the clearing. The forest seemed endless as I followed the creek, moving slowly over moss-covered rocks and slippery roots. The water's soft gurgle was the only consistent sound, a guide through the oppressive darkness. I stumbled multiple times, mud soaking my socks, the cold water chilling my hands when I had to catch myself on rocks. Every shadow looked like movement. Every distant sound felt like it was getting closer. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going, step by careful step, focusing only on one thing: distance. I had to put distance between myself and whoever or whatever was in the clearing. Hours felt like minutes and minutes like hours. My flashlight flickered in the dense forest. The batteries drained faster than I expected. I had to keep stopping to conserve light, listening intently, scanning for movement. At one point, I thought I heard a voice, faint and muffled, but it was gone before I could focus on it. I reminded myself to stay calm, to trust my instincts, and to remember that acting with purpose was the only thing keeping me safe. The creek twisted, disappearing into a thicker part of the forest, but I kept following it, knowing it might lead to a trail or another clearing. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw faint lights through the trees. Relief hit me like a wave, but I remained cautious. As I got closer, I realized it was another camper's fire. I ran the last few steps, mud-covered, exhausted, flashlight shaking in my grip. I collapsed near their fire, gasping for breath, grateful beyond words. The other camper, someone I had never met, offered silent understanding. I stayed close to the fire, trying to recover, explaining as best I could with gestures and frantic gestures what I had experienced. The tracks near my original campsite, the circling footsteps, the heavy movement. It all painted a clear picture of how close I had come to danger. One of the campers offered to walk me back to the main trail. I accepted without hesitation. The walk back was tense but safe. Every rustle in the leaves made me flinch. Every shadow seemed like it might move. But I stayed close, moving carefully, following their lead. When we finally reached the trailhead, I could see my car in the distance. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made my legs weak. I had survived, unharmed, by staying alert, moving cautiously, and trusting my instincts. Driving home, I replayed every second in my mind. The isolation that had seemed so appealing in the daylight had become a trap in the darkness. The forest had not been peaceful, not truly. It had been unpredictable, dangerous, and full of unknowns. The person or people who had been near my campsite could have had malicious intentions. I didn't know, and I would never know. What I did know was that I had made it out safely. I had avoided confrontation, kept my senses sharp, and escaped into safety without ever engaging. That night left a mark on me. I still remember the oppressive weight of the darkness, the deliberate sound of the footsteps, the way my heart raced when every shadow seemed to hide something. But I also remember the clarity of the ending, the firelight of the other camper, the walk back to safety, the relief and exhaustion that finally allowed me to breathe. I had entered the forest seeking calm and solitude, but I left with a deep respect for the unpredictability of nature and the people in it. I learned how quickly peace can turn into fear, and how much awareness, careful movement, and instinct can save you when danger is real. Even now, thinking back on that night makes my hands sweat and my heart race. But I remember the ending clearly. I made it out alive, unharmed, and wiser. I had survived not because of luck, but because I acted, stayed alert, and respected the unknown. That experience changed the way I approached the wilderness. Solitude can be beautiful, but it also carries responsibility. The responsibility to remain aware, to stay calm, and to move with caution when circumstances demand it. I left the forest with a mix of relief, exhaustion, and a heightened sense of awareness I have never lost. I had been looking forward to that camping trip for weeks. I wanted something different, something far away from crowded campgrounds with screaming kids and bright lanterns. I picked a spot deep in a national forest, a place where the roads were rough and winding, and cell service was barely a memory. The day I arrived was perfect. Sunlight filtered through tall, old trees, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the wind carried a faint chill that hinted at the coming night. I parked my car at the end of a narrow dirt road and grabbed my backpack, feeling the weight of my supplies and the excitement of solitude. The hike to the clearing I had chosen took longer than expected. The trail was narrow and uneven, covered in thick roots that twisted like snakes across the path. Every few steps, I had to stop and catch my breath. The forest was alive with noise, birds calling, leaves rustling, the occasional thump of a small animal in the underbrush. I tried to enjoy it, to soak in the calm, but there was a subtle tension I couldn't shake. Something about the dense forest, the way it seemed to close in around me, made every sound feel sharper, every shadow darker. I told myself it was just my imagination, that being alone in the wilderness made ordinary sounds seem ominous. When I reached the clearing, I set up my tent on the soft moss that covered the ground. I picked a spot near a fallen tree, its hollowed trunk providing some natural shelter from the wind. I unpacked slowly, checking my gear, arranging my supplies in a way that would make nighttime access easy. I built a small fire pit using stones I found nearby, stacked dry twigs and branches around it, and finally struck a match. The fire roared to life, casting a warm glow across the clearing. The forest beyond the firelight seemed to retreat into darkness, but the shadows between the trees were thick and almost solid-looking. I couldn't see very far beyond the edges of the clearing, and that uncertainty made me uneasy. As darkness fell, I felt a shift in the forest. The soft sounds of evening became sharper, louder. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and the wind carried unfamiliar noises. Low, scraping sounds, heavy footsteps that seemed too deliberate to be animals. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just the natural sounds of the forest at night. I reminded myself that no one else was supposed to be here, that this part of the forest was rarely visited. But there was a rhythm to the noises, a pattern that made my chest tighten. Something or someone was moving around the clearing, staying just out of sight. I stayed close to the fire, my body tense, my eyes scanning the edges of the clearing. I didn't make any noise, trying to stay as small and unnoticeable as possible. I thought about the best ways to protect myself. I had a knife and a flashlight, but I knew that wouldn't stop a determined person if they decided to approach. I could hear the difference between animal sounds and human movement. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, careful. Whoever was out there was circling the clearing, observing, testing. I could see faint glimmers in the darkness, shapes moving between the trees just beyond the firelight. My stomach dropped. I realized that staying in one place was too risky. My fire was too low to keep the area well lit, and the shadows were growing longer and thicker. I packed the essentials into my backpack: flashlight, knife, water, a small first aid kit, and left the rest behind. I stayed low, moving toward the tree line that bordered the clearing, careful not to make a sound. My mind raced with every possible scenario. What if the person had a weapon? What if they had been following me? I forced myself to focus on one thing: getting out of the clearing and finding a safer route. I spotted a small creek a short distance away, running through the trees. It wasn't much, but it could guide me toward the main trail or at least provide cover. I moved slowly, stepping over roots and rocks, keeping my flashlight pointed down so the beam didn't draw attention. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves made my heart race. I could feel sweat running down my back despite the cold air. When I reached the creek, I crouched and followed the water, moving carefully, using it as a natural path through the forest. The forest seemed endless. Every few minutes, I would pause, listen, and scan the darkness. The footsteps had stopped, but I knew that didn't mean I was safe. Whoever had been circling the clearing could be waiting, watching from a distance. I imagined the worst constantly, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to stay aware, keep my senses sharp. My flashlight beam cut through patches of darkness, revealing moss-covered rocks, twisted roots, and fallen branches. The creek was shallow, but it slowed me down. My boots slipped on wet stones, and mud soaked through my socks, making my progress slow and uncomfortable. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint glow through the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was another camper's fire. Relief hit me like a wave. I ran the last few steps, stumbling, slipping on the mud, but I didn't care. I had made it. The other campers didn't ask questions. They just nodded, recognizing the tension in my posture and the urgency in my eyes. I collapsed near their fire, finally able to breathe. I explained as best I could, showing them the tracks I had seen near my campsite. They nodded grimly. One of them offered to walk me back to the main trail, which I accepted without hesitation. The walk back felt long but safe. I stayed close to the other camper, alert to every sound, every shadow. When we finally reached the trailhead, I could see my car in the distance. I felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. I realized how close I had come to a situation that could have ended very badly. I had been alone, unarmed, and vulnerable in a part of the forest where help was hours away. The person circling my campsite could have been dangerous, and there was no way to know what they intended. When I finally drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following. But there was nothing, just the dark road behind me, the trees swaying in the night wind, and the feeling of having survived something I had no control over. That night taught me a lesson I will never forget. The forest can be beautiful, serene, and peaceful, but it is also unpredictable, and people are unpredictable too. Being aware, trusting instincts, and moving carefully saved me. I had entered the forest expecting calm, but I left with a sharp awareness of how fragile safety can be when you are alone in the wilderness. Even now, thinking back on that night, I can still feel the tension in my chest, the adrenaline in my veins. I can still hear the sound of those deliberate footsteps, feel the weight of the darkness pressing in. But I also remember the clarity of the ending, the relief, the safety, the knowledge that paying attention and acting quickly was enough to get me out unharmed. It was terrifying, exhausting, and humbling. I left the forest with a new respect for it, and for the people or situations that can appear when you least expect them.